So you want to start sharpening, but you're thinking, what sharpening stone do I use? What brand of sharpening stone do I use? What grit level do I start with? If this is you, stick around, because in this video I'm going to help you get started. Hello and thanks for joining me today off the stone here. I have started a series of 30 different videos to help you to sharpen knives. And this video is going to be a little different than the last 4. This information is going to help you to know what stone do I use or what knife or knives do I use. My recommendation for sharpening stones is definitely use diamond sharpening stones. And why diamond sharpening stones? Well, with all the different knife compositions out there today, they're using elements like vanadium and tungsten and molybdenum, and these elements, when they add them to the steel matrix, just makes it super hard. And some natural stones or some ceramics aren't going to cut as well as diamond stones. And my next recommendation will be what grits to start with. Well, I have 2 diamond stones here, and though I highly recommend these diamond stones, these are DMT diamond stones. I'm sure there are many other brands out there that are good. Just make sure you get diamond stones. And on the right here is a 325 grit stone, and on the left is a 600 grit stone. Now, what is grit when it comes to sharpening stones? Well, basically you have 3 categories. You have coarse, you have fine, and then you have polish or polishing stones. So essentially coarse stones are going to be the most aggressive. They're going to remove metal very quickly. The fine stones are still going to remove metal pretty decently. They're going to give you more of a fine edge. And then the polishing stones, they're going to polish your edge, and they're also going to make your knife edge more fine than the fine stones. So as I said, this is a 325 grit, and this is considered a coarse DMT, and this is a 600 grit, and this is considered a fine DMT. The advantage of using this coarse one when beginning sharpening is that it's going to remove a lot of metal quickly. Coarse grits, and especially diamonds, really remove metal quickly. And what that's going to help you to do is form a burr very quickly. Now, if you don't know what a burr is and why you should create a burr for sharpening, watch this video right here. I go over all the important details of creating and removing a burr in this video. Now, that's the advantage, is that it will remove metal quickly. Now, as a beginner sharpener, that could also work against you a little bit in the sense that you're not going to have the muscle memory to maybe be able to keep the consistent angle. And when it comes to angle, let me also bring up this video. This video goes through 5 different techniques of how to stay consistent when sharpening. I highly recommend this video as well. So the disadvantage of using a coarser stone when you're starting sharpening may be that if you're changing the angle quite a bit, you might mess up the edge of your knife, and it might be hard for you to fix because you haven't sharpened enough. The advantage with this 600 grit stone is going to be that it doesn't remove as much metal as quickly as the coarse stone, but it's also going to leave a fine edge. So you have a couple advantages there. You'll have a finer edge to start. Also, if you're not consistent with your angle, your knife it's not going to mess up your knife as quick as a coarser stone. Now the disadvantage with this 600 grit stone is that it's not going to create a burr as fast as this coarse stone, but it's not an issue. When I talk about the advantages and disadvantages, don't be intimidated. Either stone would suit you well, and I would definitely recommend, if you're going to start sharpening, I would try anything around the 300 grit range to the 600 grit range. One thing you don't want to do is start with a 10 or 15,000 grit stone. So if the only stone you have is like a super fine stone, you don't want to start with that. Fine stones and extra fine stones are meant to be used in progression. So basically you start with coarser stones, then you go to medium or fine stones, then you go to those extra fine and ultra fine stones. That can be one of the biggest mistakes you can make, is just trying to create a burr on a 15,000 grit stone with a knife that's super dull. It's just not worth your time. Just don't do it. Something else I wanted to bring up when it comes to coarse and fine stones is what kind of edge finish it produces. And what I mean by edge finish is sharpeners like to talk about a toothy edge or a polished edge. Now, a toothy edge is going to come from more coarser grits, and it's going to be more bitey and aggressive when you're cutting something. And then when you have fine or ultra fine stones, it's going to be more of a smooth cut. Some sharpeners prefer toothy, some prefer fine. For me, I kind of like a different edge on different knives, depending on what I'm using them for. The second thing I wanted to recommend is what knives to use. When it comes to starting sharpening, more than likely you're probably going to mess up a few knives because you're just not used to it. You're not used to holding a consistent angle. You don't know how much pressure to use, all these different things. What I would recommend is going to any grocery store that has like name brand knives that aren't super expensive, but they're not super cheap. And I would try and find high carbon stainless steels. I find high carbon stainless steels seem to be pretty easy to sharpen. I would caution you against super cheap knives, like if they're like $1 or $2. Not saying that you might be able to get some decent results at times, but in my experience, the super cheap knives were really hard to sharpen, especially as a beginner. When you're just starting sharpening, I would definitely not recommend using your nicest knives or your most expensive knives to start on. If you ruin those knives, it could be very hard as a beginner sharpener to fix the problems that you could cause. Well, I hope that information will help you to feel like you know how to get started and what stone to maybe buy and what knife to use to start with. I definitely recommend watching the 4 videos that I have already posted in this sharpening series. They go over things like how to keep a consistent angle, how to create a burr, apexing your knife. These are fundamental to knife sharpening, and they're definitely going to help you in the actual sharpening process. I'll put links for those in the description. Appreciate you joining me today, and make sure you subscribe because I have a lot more content coming.